Hey everybody, GCleph here. I'm doing another political log, so I'd like to give a shout out to my favorite. I don't know if I should call them amateur loggers, but my favorite political loggers, namely my man Scott Pugsley, sup Scott, and my other man Sailing Emmanuel, who's on here on YouTube. Scott and Sailing Emmanuel tend to have the same, some people would say libertarian views. Why exactly they're libertarian, I'm not sure, because they're more constitutional. Like, these are people who agree that the right to bear arms is not about hunting. The right to bear arms is about protecting yourself against bad government. For example, the first thing, and as far as these guys are concerned, I'm preaching to the choir, but for those of you who are trying to understand where we come from with this, the first thing that Stalin, that Hitler did, even in China, was make private ownership of a gun illegal. And that way, you disarm your population so they can't rise up against you. Anyway, I'm here to talk to you about how I basically liberated myself from all the political garbage that's out there. And the way that I did it, starting last election cycle, was by not watching television. By not watching television, and by reading print media, by reading opinions from both sides, I've found that there are problems with both of the parties. In fact, that they really stand for basically the same thing. And I'm going to use the example of Israel. In Israel, there's, equivalent of conservative and liberal parties. But the thing is they both agree on one thing, which tends to be Zionism, and the idea that the Jews, how do I say this nicely? The idea that Zionist Jews are entitled, I suppose, to the land that's there, to Palestine. And I'm not going to insert my opinion, so, let's just gloss over that. But what I'm saying is that the people, the Jews there who are non-Zionist, and there are non-Zionist Jews in Israel, they have no voice. There's no, they try to have a representational system, and how can you have a truly representational system when every view is not being represented? In this country, I hear a lot of call for a third party, as though a third party is gonna, somehow save the day. And you've seen already what happens to these groups on both the liberal and the Democratic side, both the liberal, rather, and the Republican side. They get merged into the Democrats or the Republicans. As far as the third party goes, they really would more or less join the Democrats and the Republicans in getting the same type of campaign funding that they do. A long time ago, it was decided that dollar equals free speech. So, you can't get your message out there unless you're corporately funded, and as far as mainstream politics go. The good news is we already have other political parties that aren't participating in that system, but my fear is that once they become mainstream, i.e. if the Green Party starts to pick up and takes Democratic votes, it's just gonna start campaigning from GM money, and then they'll bail out GM instead of the Democrats or Republicans, And my other point, going back to my example of Israel, everyone being Zionist, well, here everybody agrees on what's called the National Defense Authorization Act, which you need to look up if you have not heard of it. It allows the military to indefinitely detain American citizens. It was overturned by a judge, a female judge, I can't remember her name. And then after that, it was again upheld, I believe, in the Supreme Court. Which is strange because if you look at Lincoln during the Civil War when he took away posse comitatus, the Supreme Court held that that was against the Constitution because that was, again, the military arresting citizens, and they took away their right of habeas corpus, which means that they're not allowed to know what they're being arrested for. Now, I would think if I was Lincoln, I would have said, okay, well, you're being arrested for rebelling against the Union. How about that? But He wanted to be able to arrest as many people as he could, even if he merely suspected them of rebellion. So that's why he didn't want to give them habeas corpus, and that's why he suspended it for 2 years of the war. Fast forward to today, that's basically what Obama is doing. He's doing what Lincoln did before, which is the suspension of a part of what's called our right to due process, which is habeas corpus. And habeas corpus just means basically you may have the body. It lets the court either have the prisoner or not, based on whatever preliminary evidence there is. Will it go to trial, will it not? Anyone who's been to court has gone through this. Like formally arrested for really anything, you have to go through this process, except when you're arrested under the NDAA. What else don't they talk about? They don't talk about QE3. I haven't seen any of that mentioned on the reports that I've seen from the debates. Again, I don't watch the debates themselves. I prefer to read media and opinions and things like that and see what other people think of it rather than what CNN thinks of it. Because that's just not really, that doesn't interest me. I'm not interested in what mainstream media thinks. I would like to know what representative press thinks, or what InfoWars thinks, or what The Real News thinks. These are all channels on YouTube that really tend to talk about things that our mainstream media doesn't. Excuse me, I have a cold. Getting back to the whole illusion of choice here, you can really see that everyone's policies are the same. They're all for example, they're all for what I call drug prohibition, which they call the war on drugs, but it's really the prohibition of drugs. Look at what that's done. It's only increased drug usage. And, you know, I mean, this tends to be a favorite subject of mine. But it's just that it clearly does not work, because we still have people doing crack and heroin, and we'll always have people doing crack or heroin. Same thing with prostitution. Family Guy made a good reference to the loophole in prostitution. You know, I mean, if I have a camera, I can pay a girl to have sex and she's an actress. But, you know, if I don't have a camera, I pay a girl to have sex, and that's prostitution. Just this stuff doesn't make sense, and I feel like it infringes upon our freedoms. Yes, the freedom for someone to sell their body, it's their body. They should do whatever the hell they want with it. That's what this nation was founded upon, were these, what are now called libertarian principles, but I think they're more constitutional principles. The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if the pursuit of happiness includes smoking a joint every now and then, or even doing hard drugs, who am I to tell an individual, especially a responsible individual, who am I to tell them not to do that unless they're infringing upon someone else's, say, civil rights, or, you know, endangering other people? As well as this whole UN gun ban. You know, nobody's talking about that either. I would think that Mitt Romney would harp on that, because Obama went to the UN Security Council and signed that shit, you know, and all that crap. And it even says in our Constitution that no official shall be granted any title of nobility or gifts and whatever. And to me, I see the UN giving, when they gave Barack Obama the title of UN Security Overlord, they gave him a title from a foreign, if you will, government. Yes, it is the United Nations, but it's still a separate entity from our government, which is unconstitutional. Not only that, but if they try to enforce that here, that small arms ban, that's infringing upon our Second Amendment rights of the right to bear arms. And again, it's not about hunting. It's about taking over the government if we need to. As much as I disagree with slavery, I think the South had it right. The federal government was pushing those guys around, and they rebelled. And it was only because they had arms and good resources that they managed to keep up a good war. And I'm pretty sure during the beginning, a lot of it was won by the South. Only because they saw the federal government as tramping on their state rights. And we still see that today. In California, where marijuana is more or less legal, if you have a license, the federal government still goes there and takes away what is legally considered medicine, just because the federal law overrides state law, which is another problem that we have. They could even bring back slavery if they wanted to without the consent of the states, or basically bypassing state law. So, for example, if one state has a non-slavery law, and in the unlikely event that the federal government returns to slavery, their ordinance would go the way of the dodo because, for some reason, everyone decided that federal law supersedes state law. Which to me makes no sense, because I would think you would want all the states to make their own decisions on more or less everything, which is what our country originally was founded to do. If you look up the Articles of Confederation, you'll find that the states were in fact a loosely conglomerated union of independent states who in fact had their own currencies, who had their own trading rules. And I say we go back to that, because that would give us as the states a lot more power. And another critical thing that they had in the Articles of Constitution, or the Articles of Confederation rather, was that when they had an election, there was no vice president to run with the president. The guy who came in second turned into vice president. And to me that's key, because they knew that these two people would not agree on anything. And that's the key, Like when Clinton had all those Republicans in the Congress, and, he wanted all this stuff done and the Congress wouldn't do it. That's what we want. We want two people who are opposed to each other, because then less legislation will happen. It won't happen as quickly. Look at the healthcare bill that passed. All of Obama's, not all of it, but in the beginning of Obama's presidency, I'm pretty sure it was the Dems that had, if not a majority, a very high minority in the Congress, and that's why they got all this shit done. And in the end, all it was a deal that he made with the insurance companies. Thoughts on that for the people who don't know. Like my state, the state of Connecticut, has made auto insurance a must. If you own a car, you absolutely must have auto insurance. It's the law here. And I guess they did that thinking that, well, if everyone in the state has auto insurance, then that would drive down the price of auto insurance. And that's Obama's thoughts. Now, here in Connecticut, I have friends who pay $150. Friends my age, between, say, 21 and 25, who pay $150 a month for their car insurance. And they have to have it because the state mandates it. But in the end, it's still more expensive than it needs to be. And that's pretty much what I predict will happen to the healthcare, that really the price isn't going to be driven down because we all have it. If anything, they have a captive market because the federal government is compelling us to buy health insurance. Now, I myself have had medical problems in the past. And they include things like psychiatric things like anxiety and depression and whatever. And I don't even know if this stuff is properly diagnosed, because I was, literally 8 at the time when my parents had brought me to a therapist. And I feel like a lot of the time they make up their own problems, or they make up your problems. They kind of just say, oh, well, I see this, so that means that you have this, And then all that gets on your record. And then when you go to buy health insurance, they see all that on your record. I've done my own, looking around to see if I could buy myself my own health insurance right now. And they want me to pay $600 a month. It's crazy. I mean, folks, I make 18 grand a year. How am I going to afford health insurance at $600 a month? And I highly doubt that when this becomes, a national program or whatever you want to call it, it's not even a program. It's just compulsory consummation of a product that the federal government is making me buy. I'm not even too sure how I'm going to survive. In the beginning, for the first few years, there are incremental fees that you have to pay if you don't indeed have health insurance. So for the first year, I think I'm going to get a $90 fine, and then the next year, it's going to double to $180. So for the first at least 5 years, it's going to be cheaper for me to pay the fine than to actually have health insurance. And in the meantime, those who go out and buy health insurance in compliance with the law are going to be suffering because I'm not buying health insurance. So there goes Obama's idea of, oh, if everybody has health insurance, then it'll all be cheaper. Then it'll be cheaper for all of us, because that doesn't make sense. If I'm a company and I know that I have a captive audience, I'm going to charge more. I'll give you an example. One of my friends about captive audiences. Well, I'm a musician, and one of my friends who's also a musician, he played a lot of metal back in the day. I think he still does. Wish I could remember the name of their band. I'd plug it for you right now. And his name is Mark, and Mark played at this place that's local in Bridgeport called the Acoustic Cafe, back when it was run by a guy, let's say he didn't put up with any nonsense, to be neutral. In the middle of Mark's show, the owner actually went around and collected another, fee for being there for the audience. He had a captive audience. Mark could always draw a crowd, and he had friends there, and the owner had the audacity, after their first set, to go around and charge for the second set. Why? Because he had a captive audience. Because he knew they weren't going anywhere, and he knew that he could get $5 more out of them, because he knew that they wanted to be there, So if you look at this in that way, you can see that it's not going to work, because this law was made for the insurance companies. So in closing, stop watching television, start reading news articles, especially from independent sources like Representative Press, InfoWars. Russia Today has a great American wing. Al Jazeera is becoming more mainstream, so I wouldn't touch them. Who else? There's even this guy called Liberal Viewer. That's good. There's a guy named Mox News who, makes fun of news like Fox News. So, there are a few places that I can point you to, just that actually have actual news there that don't report the same garbage. And they talk about the QE3, they talk about the NDAA, they talk about the drones and stuff, and I'm telling you, everything that I've read on the debates says nothing about that. They're not talking about real issues. So what we, the citizenry, need to do is we need to start investigating this stuff for ourselves, and not, let CNN figure it out for us. Take it easy. Peace.